For 3 years, I quietly wired money to keep my parents from losing their home, skipping vacations and eating frozen meals to make it work. And at Christmas dinner, my uncle raised a glass to toast my brother for single-handedly saving this family. I smiled, reached into my bag, and pulled out a folder that changed everything. I probably shouldn't have driven 6 hours in a snowstorm to get there. My therapist, the one I could barely afford, had actually said those exact words to me 2 weeks earlier. "You don't have to go, Willa. You're allowed to protect yourself." I had nodded, told her she was right, and then spent the following weekend ironing a blouse to wear to Christmas dinner at my parents' house in rural Ohio. That's the thing about being the responsible one. You show up, even when your body is running on 4 hours of sleep and gas station coffee, even when the drive takes you through 2 separate stretches of black ice, even when some quiet, exhausted part of you already knows the night is going to hurt. I'm a licensed CPA with a specialty in fraud investigation. I work for a mid-sized firm in Columbus that contracts with insurance companies and regional banks when numbers don't add up. I've walked into boardrooms and watched senior executives sweat through their shirts as I laid out the discrepancies in their quarterly reports. I am, professionally speaking, very good at knowing when something is wrong. I should have trusted that instinct about my own family a lot sooner. Here's the background because it matters. 3.5 years ago, my dad had a stroke. He was 61, still working, still paying a mortgage on the house he and my mom had lived in for 27 years. The stroke didn't kill him, thank God, but it took enough from him that he had to stop working. He was a high school shop teacher. His disability benefits covered about 60% of his former salary. The mortgage on the house was $1,450 a month. The gap between what came in and what needed to go out was, after I sat down and did the math on a yellow legal pad at my parents' kitchen table, exactly $800 a month. I was 29. I had a steady job, no kids, a 1-bedroom apartment I rented for $975, and a savings account I'd been building carefully since I graduated. I told my parents I would cover the gap, $800 a month, directly into the household account until Dad's situation stabilized or they figured out a longer-term plan. We set up a joint checking account at Huntington, my mom's name and mine, specifically so the transfers would be seamless and Dad wouldn't have to stress about logistics. He'd had enough to deal with. "It's just temporary," my mom said that first night, her voice small and embarrassed. "We'll figure something out." "I know," I said. "Don't worry about it." That was October, 3.5 years ago. The $800 became $1,000 when their property taxes went up. Then it became $1,200 when Dad needed a second round of physical therapy that their supplemental insurance wouldn't fully cover. I adjusted without being asked. I just looked at the numbers, saw what was needed, and moved the money. I stopped going to my friend Danae's cabin trip that spring. I deferred replacing my car when the transmission started making a sound that my mechanic described as not ideal but survivable. I ate a lot of lunches at my desk. I told myself it was fine. It was family. It was what you did. My brother Avery and his wife Kristen lived 40 minutes from my parents. They went over for Sunday dinners regularly. Kristen made my mom laugh, which I was grateful for, because in those first months after Dad's stroke, my mom had gone quiet in a way that scared me. Avery helped Dad with yard work in the summers, hauling branches and mowing the lawn when Dad's left side was still weak. I appreciated that. I genuinely did. What I didn't know, what I had no idea about, was that somewhere along the line, the story my parents were telling about who was keeping them afloat had gotten rewritten. I found out at Christmas. I pulled into my parents' driveway at 4:45 in the evening, the sky already black, the temperature hovering at 19 degrees. The house looked good. Better than good, actually. There was a new storm door on the front. The old aluminum one had been rusting for years. The porch light fixture had been replaced. I could see through the front window that there was a new couch in the living room, a sectional, the kind that costs real money. I sat in my car for a moment, engine still running, looking at it. I told myself the same thing I always told myself. It was probably on sale. Mom found a deal. I went inside. Avery and Kristen were already there. My uncle Gary, my dad's older brother, the family patriarch type, the one who talked loudest at every gathering and believed this was a leadership quality, was there too, along with my Aunt Sharon and their 2 adult kids. It was a full house. There were candles on the table and a prime rib roast in the oven and a bottle of wine open on the counter that I was pretty sure cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Kristen hugged me first. She was warm and genuine, and I always liked her, which made what came later harder to sort through. Avery gave me a one-armed hug. "You look tired," he said. "I drove through a snowstorm," I said. "Should have left earlier." He smiled when he said it, but still. Dinner was loud and comfortable in the way family dinners are when you've done them 1,000 times. My dad was in better shape than the last time I'd seen him. His speech had improved significantly and he put some weight back on. Seeing him laugh at something my uncle said made the 6-hour drive feel worth it. Then my Uncle Gary stood up. He does this at every holiday. Stands, clears his throat, waits for the table to quiet. He fancies himself a Toastmaster. I've endured approximately 40 of these speeches over the course of my life. "I want to take a moment," Gary said, holding his wine glass, "to acknowledge what this family has been through this year, and I want to recognize the person who stepped up." I set my fork down slightly, not dramatically. Just set it down. "Avery," Gary said, turning toward my brother with the full warmth of a man who absolutely believes he is starring in a Hallmark movie. "You have been the backbone of this family. The way you've taken care of your parents, financially, emotionally, it has not gone unnoticed. You're a good man, the best kind of man." The table applauded. My dad was nodding, emotional, his eyes wet. My mom was smiling in a way that looked slightly too fixed, slightly too bright. Avery ducked his head in that practiced humble way he had. I waited. I waited for the correction that did not come. I looked at my mom. She was refilling her water glass. She would not look at me. I looked at my dad. He reached over and squeezed Avery's shoulder. "I mean it," he said. "I don't know what we would have done without you, son." I picked my fork back up. My hand was completely steady. That's one thing I'll say about years of fraud investigation work. I've learned to keep my hand steady when my brain is detonating. I ate my prime rib. I answered questions about work. I helped clear the table. And the whole time, I was running numbers in my head. 38 months. An average of $1,100 per month. $41,800 that had moved, electronically and automatically, from my Huntington checking account to the joint account I held with my mother. Every transaction with a memo line. Every transfer logged. Avery hadn't sent a single one of those dollars. I knew this because I had set up the account. I had set up the automatic transfers. I had logged in every few months, not every month, and I'll get to why in a second, to confirm the balance was staying stable. I hadn't dug into the transaction history because I trusted the system I'd built. I trusted my mother to use the account for what it was for. I trusted my family. After dinner, when people were milling around with dessert plates and my Uncle Gary was telling some story about a golf trip, I found a quiet moment and took out my phone. I opened the Huntington app. My mom saw me from across the room. Something passed across her face. A flicker. Quick. There and gone. And she immediately started talking to Kristen about the sectional couch, how they found it at a scratch and dent sale. I navigated to the joint account. I looked at the incoming transfers for the past 12 months. Every single deposit was mine. There was nothing from Avery. Nothing from Kristen. Nothing from any account I didn't recognize. Just my transfers, arriving on the first of every month, $1,200, like clockwork. What I hadn't looked at closely before, what I trusted without verifying, was the outgoing side. I started scrolling through the withdrawals. There were cash withdrawals I couldn't account for. Venmo payments to an account labeled Kristen K. There were several transfers to a Zelle contact saved as Avery Home. One in November for $600. One in September for $455. One in July for $720. I stood very still in the corner of my parents' living room. I did the math. In the past 12 months, approximately $3,100 of the money I had sent for my parents' housing costs had been transferred back out to my brother and his wife. I went to the mortgage servicer portal next. I knew the URL, knew the login. I had set that up 2-3 years ago. I read the screen twice to make sure I was understanding it correctly. 2 payments behind. Status, delinquency notice issued. A letter had been sent in October. Amount to cure, $3,640. The house my parents had lived in for 27 years was 2 months away from being in serious trouble, and nobody had told me. I put my phone in my pocket. I walked back to the living room. My Uncle Gary had moved on to a second story, Something about a business deal he'd brokered. Avery was laughing. My dad was smiling. My mom was watching me from the corner of her eye. I have a question, I said, and my voice came out so calm that several people looked momentarily confused, the way you look when someone speaks in a register that doesn't fit the room. The conversation paused. I said. How have you been handling the transfers? To Mom and Dad's account? He looked at me with an expression that took me a half second to decode. It wasn't confusion. It was the fast, practiced recalibration of someone who had been hoping this conversation would not happen. What do you mean? He said. The mortgage support. The household contributions. How have you been doing it? Zelle, direct deposit, check? My dad frowned slightly. Avery handles it through his business account, I think. Right, Avery? Yeah, Avery said. It goes through. It's a business transfer, it takes a few days to clear. I said, because I'm looking at the deposit history for the past year and I'm only seeing my transfers. Silence. Not the polite pause before someone speaks silence. The other kind. You have access to that account? You have access to that account? Avery said, and his voice had gone carefully flat. It's a joint account, I said. My name is on it. I opened it. Willa. My mom said my name like a warning. Mom, I said. I'm not trying to ruin Christmas. I'm trying to understand something. This isn't the time, she said. I think it might be, I said, because I just looked at the mortgage portal and the house is 2 months behind. My dad's face went through several changes very quickly. Confusion, then a dawning something, then a look I'd never seen on him before. A kind of sick, hollowed-out realization. What did you say? He said. Delinquency notice was issued in October, I said. There's a $3,640 balance needed to bring it current. The last full payment processed was in August. That's not right. My Uncle Gary had leaned forward, his bonhomie deflating. Avery, what's she talking about? Avery put his hands on his knees. He looked at Kristen. Kristen looked at her dessert plate. We had some cash flow issues, Avery said slowly. We were going to make it up. It was a short-term thing. You told me the mortgage was covered, my dad said. His voice was quiet. That scared me more than if he'd shouted. It is covered, Avery said. Willa's transfers cover it. We've had some expenses with the business relaunch and I was going to replace what we borrowed. To smooth things over while we got the Hargrove contract finalized. Borrowed, I repeated. He looked at me. It was a temporary thing. You took money from their household account, I said. Money that I sent for the mortgage. And you transferred it to yourself. And the mortgage fell behind. I was going to fix it. When, he didn't answer. My dad said his name the way he used to say it when we were kids and Avery had broken something. Except we weren't kids. And what was broken was not something you could sand down and repaint. The business has been going through a rough patch, Avery said. And now there is a defensiveness creeping in, the armor going up. You have no idea what it's been like. Kristen and I have been under enormous pressure. I needed a bridge. It wasn't supposed to be. It just kept getting pushed. For how long? I asked. He didn't answer that either. I opened the app again. I went back further. 8 months. 10 months. A year and a half. The pattern started about 14 months ago. Small amounts at first. 200 here, 300 there. Then it grew. Then it became regular. The Zelle transfers to Avery home, the cash withdrawals that corresponded with nothing in my parents' budget. In total, over 14 months, approximately $14,000 had moved from my parents' account to my brother and his wife. Meanwhile, my transfers had covered the base expenses, but the withdrawals had created a gap that my parents had quietly been filling with credit. I looked at my mom. Did you know? She was crying now, silently, which I had not expected. My mom is not a crier. He said it was a loan, she whispered. He said he'd pay it back before your father ever needed to know. I didn't want your father stressed. The doctors said. I understand, I said. And I did. I understood exactly how it had happened. Avery had asked for a small favor, framed as a bridge loan. And my mom had said yes because she didn't want Dad to worry. And then it had grown and grown until the thing she was protecting everyone from had become more dangerous than what she was hiding. "So who has actually been keeping this house running?" my Uncle Gary said. He was looking at Avery now, with an expression that bore no resemblance to the warm toast he'd delivered 20 minutes ago. Nobody answered. "I have," I said. It wasn't dramatic. It was just the fact. Avery's jaw tightened. "You make 3 times what Kristen and I make combined, Willa. It's not the same sacrifice for you." "I drive a 2014 Civic with a cracked dashboard," I said. "I haven't taken a real vacation in 2 years. I moved my emergency fund around twice to cover your parents' property tax. Don't talk to me about sacrifice." "Your parents," Kristen said suddenly, her voice sharp. "They're your parents too." "I know," I said. "That's why I've been sending $1,200 a month for 3.5 years. The room had gone very still. My Aunt Sharon had physically angled herself away from the table as though she could make herself smaller. My Uncle Gary's glass was on the table and he was not touching it. "I need some air," my dad said. "Dad, I'm fine," he said firmly. He stood here than he'd been a year ago, and walked to the back door and went out onto the porch. We could see him through the window, standing in the cold with his hands in his pockets, looking at nothing. My mom got up to follow him. I let her. I turned back to Avery. "The amount needed to cure the mortgage is $3,640, I said. "I can wire it tonight. But I'm not going to do that and then continue the current arrangement." "What does that mean?" Kristen asked. "It means I'm taking over the account management directly," I said. "I'm gonna pay the mortgage servicer directly, not through the joint account. I'm gonna set up auto pay from my account to the loan servicer, and I'm gonna have view-only access to my parents' full financial picture going forward." I looked at Avery. "And you're going to put together a repayment plan for the $14,000. $14,000? He looked genuinely taken aback by the number, which told me he hadn't kept track, which was somehow worse. $14,230, I said. "Give or take. I can send you the full transaction log if you'd like." "You can't just." "I can," I said. "Or I can file a fraud complaint with Huntington in the morning and let them sort it out. Unauthorized withdrawals from a joint account where neither you nor Kristen are listed holders. That's a conversation I'd rather not have, but I will if I need to." Kristen made a small sound. Avery looked at the table. "It was never supposed to go this far," he said quietly. The bluster was gone. What was left was just a tired, embarrassed person who had made a series of choices that compounded on each other until the whole thing was too big to fix quietly. I recognized the look. I'd seen it in conference rooms. "I know," I said, "but it did." My dad came back inside. He sat down. He looked at Avery for a long time. "I need to know one thing," he said. "Did you know your mother was covering for you?" Avery closed his eyes. "Yes." "And you let it keep going?" It wasn't a question. Avery didn't answer it. My dad nodded, once, like he was filing something away in a place he'd have to deal with later. He looked at me. "What do we need to do?" he said. "Tonight, I'm going to cure the mortgage delinquency," I said. "Tomorrow I want to sit down with you and go through the full account history in your credit profile, just to make sure there's nothing else I'm missing. And then we're going to restructure how the household support works so this can't happen again." "Okay," he said. He nodded again. "Okay." My Uncle Gary reached for his wine glass. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Avery, I owe your sister an apology on your behalf." Avery didn't say anything. "No," I said. "You don't." "I don't need the toast. I don't need the toast. I don't need the toast. I never did." I stepped away from the table and went to the kitchen. I pulled up the mortgage servicer on my phone, navigated to the payment portal, and transferred $3,620 from my account. The confirmation number came through in 40 seconds. I took a screenshot. I leaned against the kitchen counter and listened to the sound of my family on the other side of the wall. The murmured voices, the scrape of a chair. Someone quietly crying that I was pretty sure was my mom. The Christmas music that had been playing on the smart speaker in the corner had, at some point, stopped. The next morning, my dad and I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and 2 cups of coffee, and I walked him through everything. The full account history. the pattern of withdrawals, the mortgage statements. I ran his credit report, his and my mom's both. Clean, thankfully. Avery hadn't opened anything in their names. That was the one mercy. My mom sat at the table too, at first, and then she got up to do dishes and just stood at the sink with the water running and didn't really do anything. I let her be. Avery and Kristen had left the night before, after a long, exhausting conversation that ended with Avery signing a handwritten acknowledgement of the debt. Not legally binding, but a starting point, and agreeing to a repayment schedule of $400 a month for 3 years. Kristen had cried. Avery had not. He just looked at his hands and said, "I'm sorry," in the specific tone of someone who is sorry they got caught, and I'd decided in that moment to accept it anyway, because the alternative was a legal process that would devastate my parents more than it would punish him. I set up the direct payment to the mortgage servicer before I left. I set up a monthly check-in reminder for myself. I called my parents' insurance company to review their coverage. Small, practical things. The kind of things I was good at. My dad walked me to my car when I was leaving, late in the afternoon, the sky gray and low. "I should have been paying closer attention," he said. "You had a stroke," I said. "You were healing." That's not an excuse for not knowing what was happening in my own house. No, I agreed. But it's a reason. He stood there with his hands in his coat pockets. "I'm proud of you," he said. "Not because of the money. I want to be clear about that. Because of who you are. Because you handle things. You've always handled things. You've always handled things." I nodded. I wasn't sure I trusted my voice right at that moment. "I love you, kid," he said. "I love you too, Dad." I drove back to Columbus in the dark. The roads were clear, the storm having moved east. I had a podcast on, but I wasn't listening to it. I was thinking about the moment my Uncle Gary had raised his glass, the certainty in his voice, the warmth on my brother's face, the way my mother had looked anywhere but at me. I was thinking about the fact that I hadn't needed any of that to be different. I didn't want a toast. I didn't want a standing ovation. What I wanted was very simple, and it wasn't really about credit at all. It was about knowing that the people I loved were actually okay, that the sacrifices I was making were landing where I intended them to land. They weren't. But now they would be. I turned up the podcast volume, merged onto 70 East, and drove home. I keep thinking about the drive home. 70-something miles of dark highway, podcasts playing that I wasn't hearing, and this strange feeling in my chest that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite grief, but was somehow both at once. For 3.5 years, I told myself the money didn't matter, that I wasn't doing it for recognition. And that was true. I wasn't. But there's a difference between not needing applause and being okay with someone else walking up and collecting it while you're still standing in the room. That's not humility being tested. That's something else. And I think sitting with that distinction, honestly, is where the real work happened for me. What Avery did wasn't some elaborate scheme. That's the part that took me a while to get straight in my head. He borrowed a little, told himself he'd replace it, borrowed more, told himself the same thing, and kept going until the gap was too wide to hide and too big to fix quietly. That's how most of the financial damage I investigate actually happens. Not with malice at the start, but with a small choice that compounds. The math always catches up. It caught up here too, on a Tuesday night in December, over prime rib that nobody finished. My mom enabled it because she was afraid. Afraid of my dad's stress levels, afraid of Avery's fragile ego, afraid of what honesty would cost. And I understand that fear. I do. But protection that requires you to lie to the people you love most isn't protection. It's just a different kind of harm with a longer fuse. What I keep coming back to is this. I was able to sit at that table and hold my ground not because I was angry, though I was, but because I had done the work. Years of showing up, of building the kind of professional discipline that lets you think clearly when everything around you is loud and emotional. That steadiness didn't come from nowhere. It came from thousands of small decisions to do the hard thing when the easier thing was right there. You build that capacity slowly, the way you build anything that lasts. And I think there's something in that worth naming. Not in a self-congratulatory way, but as a plain observation about how life tends to work, the things you practice. Honesty, precision, the willingness to sit with discomfort instead of deflecting it onto someone else, those become structural. They hold when things go sideways. Avery never built that. Kristen never built it either. And when the pressure came, they had nothing to lean on except the hope that no one would look too closely. I'm not better than my brother. I want to be clear about that. I've made my own evasions and my own quiet cowardices over the years, but I made a choice a long time ago to try to be the kind of person whose word means something. Who keeps a record not to use it as a weapon but because accuracy matters? Who stays in the room even when leaving would be so much easier? My dad said he was proud of who I am, not what I did. I've turned that sentence over a lot since then. I think what he was pointing at is that character isn't the big moment. It's everything that made the big moment possible. The house is current, the auto pay is set, and I'm driving a 2014 Civic that I can now finally afford to get properly fixed. That's enough. It really is.